Might as well get started. But welcome to the December Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. Everyone zooming in today. We've got a agenda with a smorgasbord of items. And I know that most of us know each other. I know Alana is a little newer to the group. Would you benefit from a round of introductions, Alana?
Yeah, perhaps if we could do it again. I know I caught on last month, but if everybody doesn't mind doing it again, that would be great.
Sure. Let's start out by doing that. I'll just call on people in the the order in which they appear on the screen. But I'm Christopher Riley, co-coordinator of the Woodland Partnership, along with Kate. And I divide my time working for University of Rhode Island, largely supporting the NRCS forestry program, and then also doing independent work under. Next to Paul Dolan in Scituate.
Paul Dolan, Area Director, Rhode Island Resource Conservation Development Council.
Thanks. How about Fern?
Hey, Alana, you know me. I'm Fern, DEM.
And Kate?
Kate Sales, Northern Rhode Island Conservation District and RC&D Council, and co-coordinator of Woodland Partnership.
In Burrillville, Paul Roselli.
Greetings, everyone. Paul Roselli, president of the Burrillville Land Trust, a private, nonprofit land trust in the town of Burrillville.
Rupert.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rupert Friday, Rhode Island Land Trust Council, which is the state coalition of land trusts.
Ken.
Hey, Alana. Ken Ayers, Chief Divisions of Agriculture and Forest Environment, DEM.
Okay, going to David.
Hi, Alana. We run into each other in various contexts. I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey.
Meg.
Yeah, hi, Meg Kerr. I'm the Director of Policy at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island.
TJ.
Hi, Alana. TJ Boudreau, Deputy Chief for the Division of Forest Environment.
Amanda.
Hi, Amanda Freitas, Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan Community Liaison. I'm a double agent with the Rhode Island Natural History Survey and their DEM Division of Fish and Wildlife.
Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Marshall. I'm the state veterinarian and deputy chief of the Division of Agriculture.
Thanks. And now I've got two Scotts now. You did distinguish. We'd have that, but Scott Millar.
Hi, I'm Scott Millar. I'm the Director of Conservation and Community Assistance for Grow Smart Rhode Island.
Thanks. Alana, we can finish up with you.
Thanks. That felt very personalized, and it's really great to put faces to names. So I'm Alana Russell. I am the URI Biocontrol Lab Manager, and I'm the new State of Rhode Island FEMC Coordinator.
Thanks. Well, we've got a good crew here. And so to start off with the agenda, I guess we've got a couple of topics that I think those from DEM will lead the sort of discussion on. But we had been working on our list of key strategies for conserving Rhode Island forests, and wanted to make sure that dovetailed or works with what DEM is going to be focusing on, and thought that it would be helpful to get an update from you guys in general, and and particularly vis-a-vis that that sort of policy brief that we were working on.
Sure, I'll start off, and TJ, I'm going to turn to you quickly in this regard, but the strategy for conserving Rhode Island forests, it incorporates what the Woodland Partnership has drafted, which is very much in play in multiple discussions, as well as a lot of other things that aren't necessarily in that, or perhaps referred to in that, management of DM forests, insect and pest control, forest restoration, et cetera, et cetera. So I view that as in the broader context of the things that I think about now in the role that I have. And there is a lot of multiple discussions on a lot of issues that we're working our ways through. Some of those are internal. Some of those are more external. But fair to say that perhaps the overarching priority is the policy and the priority that we place on conserving Rhode Island forests and amplifying that message for a variety of reasons: climate change, the fact that we're stewards of this property, and economic development potential. When I say economic development, I'm talking about in the world of forestry, forest products, things like that. So I think the thing that I want to capture the most is it is a priority, and I view my job as to amplify this resource and the protection of this resource and the management of this resource. It's going to take many ways, and we're going to settle on exactly that strategy, which is kind of what we're all talking about here. But as has been true in the world of agriculture, it's very important that we do this in a manner that we are looking at it as an ecosystem of not just resources, but people. What makes the local food movement work is the broad way of doing so, partnering with Farm Fresh Rhode Island, Southside Community Land Trust, Hope in Maine, and all those partners. DM has a certain bully pulpit, but we're still only, relatively small in terms of our resources. So really things like this, meetings like this, and partnerships like this are vitally important to the way I think about, the future. And I'm committed to the relationships. I believe in that as a way of moving things forward. So you'll see me taking that approach to this. And I know that's true of TJ, having gotten to know him better over the past couple of weeks, that he feels the same way, as well as does Jay McAmey, who is also the new Deputy Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Natural Resources. So as a team, we're all thinking about this a lot, multiple discussions with the director of DEM, multiple discussions with individual members and groups of you. So while we haven't quite settled on the exact finality of what we're going to push, there's multiple discussions which involve finalizing draft legislation, and TJ Scott are working on that, determining and others, exactly what the framework of our push is going to be, making sure that we're bringing forward at the same time all the vast management responsibilities that we have at DEM, other pieces of property which I think have been undervalued and underutilized, like Decopit, which is one thing that's really on my mind right now. Making sure that the public has full knowledge, access, and that we're using that to its full potential. Looking at the threats to resources like that, the damage that's been caused by, insects, disease, and things like that. So a lot going on, a lot of discussions going on, but it's a priority. I guess that's the point to be. Not that it hasn't been before, but I'm going to push it. So that said, TJ's in the weeds much more than I am on this, has spent his day dealing with the storm and watching all the emails go back and forth. It's amazing what happens when a storm happens and what you deal with on state management property. Trees falling on people's sheds, from whatnot to whatnot. But TJ, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. You would think it was the first time it's ever snowed in Rhode Island, right?
Right.
But yeah, so exactly how Ken teed this up for us, it's sort of a positive coincidence that ag and forestry are now joining hands to work together. Given the emphasis that forest land is having with this group and just in general in Rhode Island, Ken mentioned one of the things that we're working on is legislation that myself and Scott Millar have been teeing around. So I know that that had been sent around to the partnership, I believe. Scott Millar, I don't know if you're on, Scott, or not, but I think he sent it around early in the week or late last week for comment from the partnership. The good thing that I can say from DEM, we're, after Scott and I had hashed it out together, we had sent it around to our leadership team to take a look. And there really wasn't a lot of changes from what you all had seen that Scott sent out, which is really good. So the big thing for us was that legislation is the creation of some sort of forest land conservation committee or act that's similar to the farmland that was created in the 1980s. So sort of taking the same track and doing what was done for farms, knowing that threat existed 30 years ago, bringing forest land into the same priority that that farmland was taken back in the 80s for forest land. It's kind of interesting that it hadn't been done before, but that's in the past, and now we're trying to look forward to moving ahead with that. And with that given said, the only thing that was something that was up for consideration was whether or not that act would create a separate forest land conservation committee that would be responsible for creating easements or purchasing land similar to the way that the Farmland Conservation Commission does. And the consensus with us, not that it's been totally hashed out yet, but was that committee would not be doing that. The committee is there to inform basically all the things that Ken just talked about, bringing into the 21st century the importance of forest land, local forest products, basically everything that we're talking about. And then that commission would then lend a hand in assisting land acquisition in prioritizing and helping figure out the best way to preserve forest land now that we're starting to get an influx of money. The working lands area that was included in the green bond was the first time that forest land had been included in that. Looking at how that money can be spent and be utilized if it's for match for projects like I think we're going to be doing in the near future with that money moving forward. If it is the creation of purchasing easements that DEM owns, if it is continuing on with that match, what have you, looking at that group to be able to inform the already existing land acquisition committee in their role. So that's kind of the main focus of it, apart from the other things that has already been sent to you guys. I don't want to belabor it, but just for your information, just so you know that I think that was a positive thing, that there wasn't pushback. It was something that was seen as a positive thing. Why haven't we done it already? We should be moving forward with this. So I think it's going to have a lot of support at DEM, and it's going to be something that we're going to try to put on the legislative docket for this coming session, which would be a big win for us and kind of the start to pushing in more aggressive legislation for forest land protection, kind of getting that recognition from the legislature that forest land is a crucial component that needs to be preserved. I think is a big win in and of itself. So.
Hey, so TJ, did you say that the Ag Land Preservation Commission would be advising like they are the farmland, or?
Yeah, so it's two different things, right? The Ag Land Preservation runs a certain way versus the regular Land Acquisition Committee. I don't believe that there's going to be a situation where we're looking for that commission to create easements similar to the way Ag Land does, but just the holistic land acquisition in general.
Okay.
So can I just follow up again? I just want to be clear, I understand. So the legislation intends this commission would maybe like develop some criteria or something that then would be provided to the Land Acquisition Committee at DEM to take under advisement, that kind of assistance?
Yes, yeah. Okay. And then there was, I want to say it was like two key areas, to recommend new funding sources to conserve forests, encourage different ways to encourage landowners to maintain and manage their land, looking at the ways to determine how forest conservation helps fight climate change. All of those types of activities that are around generally the protection of forests, not create something that is dual acting similar to the way ag land preservation is. It's just something that, at DEM right now, that's not going to be something that's feasible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, as TJ mentioned, if you in legislation say something that's really, really important, things work off of that. And that's really the goal. So, we want to capture all the reasons that forest land is important now and into our future. And then things spin off of that. It might be a program, it might be a regulation, it might be a grant program, right? That's what we want to accomplish. We need to get that in legislation.
Yeah, this is sort of our first run. I think it's going to be successful, and then that pushes us into the future next year and in the years forward.
So just wanted to just return to the key strategies for conserving, Rhode Island forests, document, since I know a number of, partners were interested in distributing it or, moving forward in different ways. And is there a time frame or, some steps that, DEM would be looking at for us to be able to do that as the Woodland Partnership?
I don't know if Ken, more on deadlines. I know that, Scott Millar has already sent this out to the partnership. If there are comments, we welcome them. Right now, we're still funneling it around. Janet hasn't sent back her final comments on the legislation, apart from just having conversations about it. That's been written down. But I don't see any issue with you guys sending something back to us now. I don't know how that works in a formal process, getting that back to us, but we've been open with you guys about it. So we'd be happy to know if there's comments that you have, or if there was something that would be written in general from the partnership as a collective.
I think there's normally a cycle that we all go through to develop legislation, certain timelines that are deadlines that are consistent each year, but everything's right now off kilter, and I don't know what deadlines are for legislation, et cetera. And there's always a little bit of a dance between whether a piece of legislation is a departmental proposal or a proposal that comes from the outside. Rupert's very familiar with all this. Ultimately, however it ends up being, and what, for us, it's whether ultimately up to the governor's wants to make it part of her priority list, or it comes from the outside. We're trying to achieve a comfort zone so that whether it comes from us or you, we can be in a position to be supportive and not supportive. That's the goal. So we're trying to make sure we're on the same page, aligning our interests and priorities. And if this ends up being something that comes from the Woodland Partnership or through a legislator, basically, not from the governor, we've already done basically our homework. We've talked to each other, or we feel good about where it's going to be, and we're not going to have a scramble or differences of opinion when it appears in as a bill. It's kind of the objective here.
So, or my understanding we had a kind of our group of informal working group of forest policy stalwarts who are ready to receive something, if anything, back with some blue pencil or suggested changes that that we could finalize as it were, and then run with it. Is that something that you'd feel comfortable with the partnership doing at this point, or better to wait?
I don't think it's. I don't know, Scott, TJ, where maybe you can say more specifically. I don't know what draft you're on in terms of bill itself. Certainly, we want the partnership to see it. That's not the issue. I would wait till it's pretty close to a very mature document before that goes out, I guess. I don't know. TJ, Scott, why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think apart from having written comments from Janet, I don't know if there's going to be much change compared to what we've already done internally. Ryan Mulcahy took a stab at changing some of the language, and then we went back and forth with him. And I haven't heard anything else really from the leadership at DEM, apart from Janet saying that she still has to take a look at it. So I think at the end of this week, if I'll touch base with Ryan tomorrow to see if there's anything else, and if he's happy, I could send that around to Scott Millar to give back to you guys to look at what DEM's at least proposal changes are to the draft that that Scott had written up are, so you can know where we're coming at. And like I said, there really isn't a lot of change. There was a lot of question marks in that first draft saying, should we or should we not include this? And we've kind of not included those items that were thought to be, questionable, which was a given. So it's not going to look too different from what you've already seen, but you can look at what we have and be confident that, we've taken a serious look at it and support kind of what you're going to see next week.
Just
If I could just add to that, I would urge that preliminary, a draft be sent to as many stakeholders as possible at this point, just to get more and better ideas before, with all due respect to the director, before she weighs in on a final bill. I think it would be good for her to at least see some potential changes that others have suggested. The draft that I put together, frankly, is quick and dirty. I'm not suggesting it's perfect in any way. So I think the more eyes looking at it early in the process, the better. And I know later on the agenda, I can walk you through some of the questions that I had that perhaps you folks would want to begin to weigh in on.
So I just want to clarify something. So I think we're talking about two different documents. We're talking about the bill and legislation, but also the key strategies document. Am I incorrect about that, or?
We haven't been talking about that key strategies document.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right now we're only talking about legislation, not key strategies.
Yeah. Correct. In terms of going back and forth with making changes. Yeah.
So I have a suggestion, which of course you can take or leave, but the way Ken framed up the purpose of this legislation and what DEM and us, if we embrace it, which I'm sure we will, hope to accomplish, those 3 or 4 sentences that I took notes on, I think that's useful to have when you share it with people. Like, this is the intent of this bill, what we hope to accomplish, to enshrine forestry in legislation. I'm not going to say it all, but those things. If you don't disagree, I just think that would be helpful. When people look at it, they can have that in mind and then read through the bill. It's a little different than the purpose statement of the bill itself.
I agree that the way Ken framed it was excellent.
You hit the record button, right? Perfect. So we could use that. But yeah, no, I agree, Meg. That makes perfect sense.
Just to jump over to the key strategies, the one pager for a moment, was seeking some guidance on how to move forward with that, and that's more of a conservation advocacy, but had been anticipating some comments or feedback from DEM, but I know that's something that some partners would like to be able to move ahead with sharing. And is that something that we could move on sooner? We just didn't want to get that mixed up with the bill.
We've been discussing that internally as well. I think it's a little bit behind the legislation in terms of the pace within DEM. I know TJ's provided specific comments on every bullet point. Director's seen no comments but hasn't provided feedback yet. So TJ, I think that we can probably, in close to the same time frame, maybe just following a little bit behind the legislation, get you all any comments back from DEM. It's very much in play as well. So I think within the week, something like that, hopefully we can get something back to you. The legislation is one of those 7 or 8 bullet points, and that's what we've been focusing on. But there wasn't, frankly, that we had much argued about anything else that you wrote. It's pretty much how we think as well. So we'll try and get the comments back on that as in close to the same time frame.
Okay, thanks. We'll wait to hear back with your sort of the blessing before we go ahead and engage the informal working group again, and then distribute after that.
I'll just add to that. I think a couple of those, the hiccups, might be related to the solar siting, the directive of the state to be, reenacting the OER stakeholder group, those sorts of things that are outside of DEM's probably power. So, whether or not it's something that we all think should happen, I don't know, just to lay it out there now, what DEM officially can say about, we support, OER doing this, so we support the governor's office, these new committees. So you might see language that's directed towards, we support some of this, but, just logistically, we don't have the power to say yes, just a couple of other things, but just so you know.
So to clarify with that, knowing that this is a statement coming, these strategies are a statement coming from the partnership and not directly from DEM, is
Right.
that something where DEM might just not sign it, or we should rephrase?
Well, DM's one member of the partnership.
Right.
So, we don't control that. We'd certainly want to be, like any partnership, to be all on the same page and find the common ground that we all agree upon. That's the whole goal of this. And usually, we'll try and massage language so that it's something where we could all feel comfortable with. I think, as TJ mentioned, there's a couple of sensitive points. I have my idea about the pathway to deal with those, and I've already suggested those on how to do so internally. But certainly one of the things on our mind, director's mind, is that balancing act between renewable energy and forest preservation, which frankly shouldn't be competing goals if you think about what we're trying to achieve in the end, right? And that's really where we want to make sure that we are moving both goals forward at the same time to achieve the ultimate objective. They shouldn't be competing, they should be aligning. And I have, we want to get there. But right now, it's just like farmland preservation 30 years ago. One part of it jumped way out of head, the other part's needs to catch up. The way you catch up is you establish the priority of the other one that's behind, and then you work off of that. And the best way to establish it is in legislation. You also think about the people that control policy and how to make sure in their minds the same thing is happening. And so they're, fantastic people in governor's office and in state government, and and it's an entirely appropriate goal in terms of renewable energy. But there's some work to do to just make sure that this side of the equation is equally important to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So we're thinking about that. I have my ideas about how to get there, and I'm discussing the same with the director.
So I appreciate that a lot. And I think, at least for me, when we were working on these strategies, part of what we were trying to articulate is the important role that DEM needs to play in this conversation around renewable siting, which is what we're talking about with this bill and stuff. So I think that last bullet, at least, I don't speak for everybody, but for me, if it could be reworded to explain how DEM is going to engage in the future around critical forest protection in the solar siting arena, I think many of us would really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Kind of our lame attempt at doing that, what's written here, my lame attempt. Yeah. Thank you.
I think it gives a voice to us without being able to say it ourselves. So, I think it's good.
Okay, well, thanks. This is very helpful. Scott, I know we've already started talking about the draft, the Forest Conservation Commission bill, and I don't know if this would be a time if you had more that you wanted to say about that, to just move into that item next, and since we're already talking policy before getting into wetlands.
Sure, let's do that. And let me just try to give you a sense of what my thoughts were my thought process was in trying to prepare this bill, and that might help a lot. So the intent, as I saw it, was to provide incentives to encourage forest conservation. Really, the intent is all carrots to do that, no sticks. It helps to implement the Woodland Partnership and DEM priority actions that we've discussed in establishing a Forest Conservation Commission and trying to find a new funding source to help with acquiring forest land. It provides a legislative recognition for the forest values and a mandate for forest conservation. And those are the forest values articulated in the Value of Rhode Island Forests report. It makes the connection between forest conservation and Rhode Island's climate change goals. And lastly, I think it helps DEM maintain a forestry program. Having worked for the state for many years, it's really helpful to have a legislative mandate when it comes to replacing key staff. DEM is competing, the forestry program and DEM is competing internally with other divisions for staff. And obviously DEM is competing with other agencies for a limited budget. So it just really helps to carve that out, I think, in legislation. So that's what I was trying to do. So the bill does establish a Forest Conservation Commission, and it's the charges that come right out of the language that we discussed numerous times and DEM has embraced. So that's what I limited the charge to do with the Forest Conservation Commission. One question I think we might want to consider is there's nothing in there to address urban forestry. So let's just sort of put that in the parking lot until I finish. And that's something we may want to discuss further should this commission have that charge to be looking at urban forestry issues or not. I think it's important to talk about what the bill doesn't do. It doesn't establish any new regulatory program for forest land. So, because I've already heard that rumor and I just wanted to dispel that. That was not my intent. There's nothing in here that would do that. The commission will not be involved with land acquisition. That's already been misinterpreted by several people. And there's nothing in there that would suggest in any way that this commission would be involved in ranking forest parcels to be purchased, interfering with what the conservation easements might be, anything like that. That was the role of the Farmland Preservation Commission, and I specifically took that role out of this commission because to me, it's a duplication of existing programs. There's already people doing that. They're doing it well. Just continue to let them do their job without putting another layer involved. So the commission itself has 2 ex officio members and has 9 public members. I'm suggesting 2 members have some kind of a forestry background, and I'm defining that pretty broadly. 1 member that would have a land use planning kind of a background. 1 member would have a land preservation background. There would be a forest landowner. There would be a representative of forest products industry, loggers, sawmill operators, etc. There would be an environmental organization. And it's not specifically in here yet, but I'm suggesting somebody with a habitat background. That was my mistake for not putting that in there. And then it would have 1 more person that the director could determine to be added. And unlike the Farmland Preservation Commission, these appointments are not going to be made by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. Frankly, I think that process just gets bogged down. Oftentimes governors don't appoint people as they vacate these positions, and it becomes the appearance of a political process, which I'm trying to avoid. This just gives the director, whoever he or she may be in the future, the authority to go out with recommendations from TJ and Ken, who are the best people to be on this commission, and appoint them quickly. And then I put in here that the Forest Conservation Commission can have subcommittees that would be comprised of members not part of the commission to represent key stakeholders on other issues that they might be studying. So I just want to bring your attention to key questions that I think we should address. Questions that were raised in my mind as I was preparing this bill is we don't have a very good definition of forest land. I took the existing definition from the Farm, Forest, and Open Space Act, but it specifically says forest land is defined by you have to have an approved DEM forest management plan to be considered forest land. That works well for the Farm, Forest, and Open Space Act. It doesn't necessarily work well here. So I suggested either deleting that requirement for a management plan or coming up with a new definition. I think I already talked about should we add urban forestry or not, and a habitat person to the commission. Those are questions I had. And a big question is the Farmland Preservation Act set aside a specific dollar amount in the act. It was $2 million from every subsequent bond issue used to preserve open space. So my question, and this is really to DEM, because you have a lot more experience with this than I, does it make sense to put a dollar amount in this bill, similar to what was in the Farmland Preservation Act, for a specific targeted amount? Or do you think that might create a lot of angst with the General Assembly as they review this? So that's really your discretion, but something to think about, because again, it is in the Farmland Preservation Act. They set aside $2 million.
There's a question about that, Scott. I don't mean to interrupt, but if the language of the bill does not direct the commission to acquire land because of duplication of programs, how would we have language about an amount of money?
Well, there is some language that could be inserted. I put some draft language there. It could be modified from the Farmland Preservation Act. And I did call that out in my comments in the bill. And I think that's something that DEM needs to look at internally. Again, they have more experience with that. So that's just my overview of the bill. Those are the key questions that I saw, but I certainly welcome other feedback on this. And again, I would suggest the earlier we can get comments, the better, so that whatever final version is approved by the director of DEM, she would have the option of looking at all those other comments.
So I was able to watch an hour of the No Net Loss webinar from Connecticut. Maybe a bunch of us did. But one of the things that they highlighted several times was the need for these clear definitions. So I'm glad you flagged that, Scott. And I think particularly if we start thinking about the urban forestry, we're going to need definitions about forest versus tree cover, and so that we know that it's being applied correctly. I don't have those definitions, but they are struggling with that in New Jersey, Connecticut. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Scott, good comments, and we'll take up some of those things. My gut reaction to urban forestry is it needs to be part of it. I think about the role of forest in reducing, the heat of urban landscapes. I think that's really important. Well, forest is perhaps the wrong term. They're trees, and which makes you think about what, whether we want to talk about just forest land or trees. That's a little tricky, but really high priority for DEM is urban forestry, just like urban agriculture is.
We've had a fair number of conversations in this group about the ways that language resonates: conservation versus preservation, forest versus woodlands. What do people think they actually own? In my original comment going through the bill, I was going to say, well, why don't we call this woodlands? But I didn't make that comment because we have a Farm, Forest, Open Space Act, people in the legislature at least, and this is just legislation at this point. Those are the words they're using. So I don't know if it makes sense to go with a completely different thing and call it woodlands, or for the purposes of this act, forest land means this. But it seems like the urban forests have to be different either way, because we're talking about intact forests on the one hand, and then we're talking about mostly human benefits on the other. But the definition in there now, definitely Scott had already flagged it, about having to have a plan. And that's a condition for certain DEM programs, but it's certainly not going to be a condition of acquisition or anything. And we do want this to sync, even though this doesn't create an acquisition committee, we do want it to sync up with the parts of DEM that are looking at acquisition. So I also don't have an answer, but those are the problems. And I will send language. This is really just about the way that it's couched to begin with, but I had some comments on the economic part of it, because one of the reasons that this falls short, and it's not exclusive of forest land, but just ecological values in general, is I'd rather, instead of saying that the ecological value is less or the economic value is less as forest land than it is as developed land, to explain why that's not really the case, but it comes out the case in like a simple land seller. So to talk about how the forest benefits are either not accounted for at all, or some of them are accruing to the public, and it's about making the private landowner whole because they're providing those at their own expense.
I feel pretty strongly that urban forestry, urban forests should be included somehow. I think it raises a bunch of definitional problems, but I think the benefits are really big for engagement. I mean, if you want to try to break down the, suburban white middle class people and that barrier for urban, immigrant, all of those other things we're trying to reach out to, this would be great. I mean, everybody could engage in, forest conservation or learning about the values of forests. And I think the definition question then is really tough, but I do think it would be worth trying to figure it out because of the benefits that would come from engaging everybody in this, not just the people who live outside the city.
It's going to help us get more legislative support. And I think we'd be accused of being absolutely tone deaf if we didn't do something about urban forestry.
Yeah.
Maybe we could make it something as simple as distinguishing between woodlands and intact woodlands, or forest and intact forests, and then explaining why, one is very valuable in a certain place and is being held up high, but why this is also a separate component that has a ton of value where the most people are.
Can I ask maybe some of the DEM folks, or maybe Scott, I mean, when somebody says urban forestry, a lot of times, I think in my head, at least, what gets put into that basket is like street trees and stuff like that. And I don't think we're talking about street trees in urban forestry, like one tree at a time. So are we just talking about Newtoconkinut Hill and Blackstone Park, or are we talking about like an urban forest is a whole bunch of blocks that all have street trees? And I think you could make a case for only counting the big blocks that are contiguous to urban populations, like the ones I named, or I think you could certainly make that case. But I still think the further you can drive it into the street tree realm, the better, even though I recognize that this gets incredibly further and further, more and more difficult. So.
I think Molly could probably address that if she was here much better, but my understanding, it's really trying to have the percent canopy or canopy coverage in an urban area. And so obviously some neighborhoods are pretty deficient there. And there's real benefits to increasing canopy coverage that she could speak very well to.
And I'm gonna step away, but so what you're saying about David talking about, like, for us, we think of it as like a whole continuum, from that one tree in your yard, you live in Central Falls, to Foster on the Connecticut border. The whole thing is a continuum. Where that line starts to become urban forestry is fuzzy, because, you know, part of Situate is pretty urban, you know, in Hope, but in North Situate it's pretty rural. But that community in and of itself has an urban forest, whether or not you recognize it. So it's like every tree is, not every tree is special, but every tree matters. All locations matter. And it's just trying to figure out, when does canopy matter? When does canopy not matter? Canopy doesn't matter in Exeter, but canopy matters a lot in Providence and from neighborhood to neighborhood. So trying to get an equal coverage for compensating for inequality is kind of, you know, what it is. Understanding that Providence will never be Exeter, but parts of Providence are different than other parts. And how can we try to make all of one community equitable in its coverage to the best of its ability?
So I don't know if this is helpful, but I'd like to address two parts and to jump off of what TJ said. So I think we should stick to the terminology of forests and urban forests, not woodlands. When you talk about private landowners, you talk about non-industrial private forests, things like that. And that terminology is really important. Also, when you think about a forest, you're talking about the whole ecosystem. It's not just the trees. I think we're getting too focused on trees. So when you talk about an urban forest, you want to see where the ecosystem is. So you have the urban forest in Providence, and you have different parts, and that includes street trees. You're talking about an urban ecology there. You're talking about the animals, the insects, and the people that live in that ecology there, and the whole thing is a forest. I think Nancy would probably be really helpful with this because her background is specifically urban forestry as well for that terminology. And then, you know, as TJ was saying, as you move, it's all this ecology that blends together, and then you can look at it at smaller and smaller scales. I hope that was helpful and not confusing.
Thank you.
I was just saying, I think you bring up that really good point there, Fern, that I think for a lot of people, when you think of urban forestry, you don't own it. It's all like a community owns an urban forest, but a woodland is owned by a private individual. You know, this is my forest, this is my land, but an urban forest is what's all around you, and everyone owns it as a collective. But it's just a different way of thinking of ownership, I think, adds to the complication of it.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of thinking about like this over here would be the best thing to save for wildlife, and then this over here would be the best thing for people. And how the heck do we like reconcile those two things? But I think that what you just said, Fern, is would have broad appeal to the people that David was talking about, bringing in the suburbanites, and you know, and there's wildlife value to that too. So this is something I struggle with, making the distinction between like, this is like the most important if we want to keep all these species, and bringing everyone into the fold, and also recognizing the value that those lands have in and of themselves, even in the urban areas. So I think that is very helpful.
Scott, Ken, maybe TJ too. I'm just curious about something maybe Ken, you mentioned earlier about the balance of renewable energy and forest. I wonder if whatever bill that's created, if we don't skirt the issue, but we do talk about the issue. That's one comment. So I think somewhere in the legislation it should, if it's an intent or whatever, or observations, or you know, the General Assembly recognizes, et cetera, something in there about what is happening. I mean, there's a reason for this legislation. If nobody, if there weren't any clear cutting of forest of 400 acres, I'm not quite sure anybody would be jumping up and down and saying, well, you know, maybe we should do something. So I don't think we should skirt the issue. And the second thing I'm just thinking out loud here, wondering out loud, if perhaps the intent could cause conflict between state agencies. So, I'd like maybe Ken or TJ to address that. You know, you got OER who's hell bent on leaving the incentives the way they are, maybe putting up some money for carports here and gravel banks here, but the intent is, hey, the incentives are there. Let's get going. And you know, as a landowner, hey, I don't see any alternative. If somebody comes up and offers, and I know you know, I know you know those stories, but is there a conflict, and how do you address the conflict between those two state agencies?
So great points, Paul. And I completely agree that this is not to skirt the issue. In fact, it's to bring them to me. All right, it actually to bring them all out. The reason, and this happened with farmland as well, that one part moves forward so quickly is because of the weakness in the other part, right? And this is why we need to reaffirm and establish the role of forestry to accomplish the exact same goal, right? In a different way, that our drive to a renewable energy, that the renewable energy goals have. It's all should be aligned, but we haven't captured adequately the role that each component of the ecosystem plays towards that goal. And therefore it's easy to lose certain parts of that because we're not balanced. This is my perspective. So really what I want to do is to bring all of the role that forests have, and not just forest, right? We're different parts of the natural environment to accomplish the same goal of a resilient society going forward, right? That's not there yet, but it needs to be spelled out specifically, just what you said, right? Specifically in something that's important enough that you can't deny its value. To me, that's legislation. And when you have that in legislation, you can, like I said at the beginning, you can work off of that to defend, to establish things that are equally important. Now, to do so, you know, there's various methods, ways that you have to go through to establish that. You got to have bills in the General Assembly and the governor's office. But also, I agree completely that internally within state government, you also have to achieve that goal so that you have a piece of legislation that's going to be supported. Otherwise, there's going to be a battle. Not that I don't think that would happen, but certainly we don't want to be competing with another program or prior established goals of the governor to accomplish this. I've already proposed to the director my suggestion for dealing with that. There's some great people in state government in positions that would, in the governor's office, that I think help us to establish that. And I would want to work through those people. And I think that we can. And so I'm already talking to the director about what I think is a pathway to get to exactly what you're saying. So you're having two agencies moving forward, two programs moving forward at the same time that don't outweigh each other. So I'm there. I can't get too much in the weeds on this in terms of how I think that we could accomplish that, but my goal for an outcome is exactly what you're talking about, Paul.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Folks, I apologize. I got dropped out for about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm having a lot of trouble with my internet connection. So if we're still on the legislation, the bill, I'd just like to know about the next steps. We talked about including something about urban, making some suggestions for putting habitat in there. I just want to be clear, who's going to make those next revisions? TJ, is that something that DEM could take on from here, since you have a much better understanding of the definitions of urban forest? You're best to address the question about whether or not there should be money, some allocated dollar amount put in the bond for future bonds, similar to what the Ag Land Preservation Commission has, et cetera.
Yeah, we can take that over and include that kind of information about recognizing the importance of urban forestry along the scope of forest in general.
Okay.
Fair to say we'll, want to touch base on, on this bill during subsequent Woodland Partnership meetings as we get into the policy and legislation season. But can plan on, setting aside some time for this in our policy discussion. Anything else now?
I guess just the time frame. I know Ken mentioned at the beginning that this General Assembly session is going to be very different than what we've probably seen in the past, and we're not sure what timeframes might be to get bills introduced. Typically, the last time you can really get a bill in would probably be sometime in early February. So in the event this doesn't go in as part of the director's legislative package, we would need to scramble around to find sponsors in the House and the Senate, make sure that they fully support this bill, willing to run forward with it. So we just need to be in close contact just to make sure that we have adequate time so we can actually get this in the session this year or this coming year.
Yep. Rupert, have you heard anything about deadlines yet? Okay.
No, I haven't. I suspect the General Assembly deadlines will be pretty similar to other years, but I think your point was deadlines for the governor's package, which are usually we're past where they usually are. So I don't know what the plans are there.
Okay.
And to your point, Scott, if we need to find sponsors, I don't think that's going to be a problem at all. There are a lot of legislators that are really paying attention to this issue. So not worried about that.
Well, to be continued. We'll plan on revisiting this topic. Why don't we move on, from one, policy issue to another, but the proposed changes to the state wetlands regulations and the potential effects on forestry. I know there's a webinar yesterday in which the department and Ken, ran through some of these things. Some of them seemed pretty complex, but I don't know if you could be able to provide a sort of practical, summary here, and what it might look like for the forestry community going forward.
Sure. So I'm probably most of you know that for several years running, working off legislation that was passed, I don't recall, 5, 6, 7 years ago, DEM has been tasked with developing a set of regulations pursuant to legislation to create a single standard for wetlands regulation in Rhode Island. Right now, there is the state, and then there's multiple zoning ordinances, et cetera, relating to wetlands at the local level. It was considered confusing. There's a task force that put together this recommendation for legislation and then regulations. This has been ongoing for many years. It had some fits and starts, but ultimately DEM has proposed a final set of regulations, which was supposed to have its public hearing actually today at 1 o'clock, postponed by the storm. I've been leading an effort during all that span to make sure that the agricultural community is, conversant, aware, interacting with DEM on the agricultural side of this. Now I want to make sure that forestry is the same, even though it's much later in the development of all this. long story short, we had a Zoom meeting with the agriculture community last week, in which I kind of emceed an effort to have the Office of Water Resources talk to the agriculture community just before the public hearing. Set one up for Tuesday, I think it was, or Wednesday yesterday at 10 o'clock, and invited the forestry stakeholders to do the same thing. Christopher was part of that, some others. It's really a chance for the Office of Water Resources to talk through how these rules impact foresters and forestry practices. Is valuable. Really perhaps the main message is that all of the exemptions and processes that are captured as practices that are allowable under the current wetlands rules will largely be unchanged under the new wetlands rules. There are obviously differences in definitions, et cetera, but in terms of forestry practice in relation to wetlands, of which there is a guidebook that DM and I think RIWP put together 15 years ago, that's not going to change that much, and that's pretty much the main message to the community. So we need to get a little bit more into the weeds and flesh that out, and we will do so. And that guidebook itself needs to be updated, which I think we certainly hope that the partnership and various agencies play a role in. But that's kind of the main point of this. Fern, you were there. TJ, you listened in. Any additional comments in this regard? Or Christopher?
No, you pretty much covered it, Ken. Thanks.
Yeah. So the public hearing for the rules has been pushed back to, I'm not sure when, sometime in January now. But we're open to any additional dialogue with foresters on the rules itself. Christopher, if you could send out the information that I sent out to the partnership, draft rules, where it's on the website, all that type of stuff, that'd be great. But that's kind of what that was all about.
Yeah, just from my experience as a field forester, I think it could be helpful at some point to have some kind of workshop or session, just talking about how what this would look like when you're laying out a timber harvest in the field, for example,
Right.
that has
Right.
Wetlands and streams and so forth in the area, and if the the buffer widths for practical purposes are changing, or if the percentage of trees that you need to leave is going to look different. I think that could be still teased out just a little bit more. And maybe we could do that with one of our Woodland Partnership members, like RIFCO, or an organization that's pretty active with forestry on the ground.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Mark is
Great
actually
idea.
Hey, hello, this is Mark. I'm not on your video because my Wi-Fi is down, but I've been really following this issue with the wetlands quite a bit. RIFCO has historically kind of tried to stay on top of this issue with our membership. And Christopher, your point exactly. I want to kind of double down on that a bit. We need. I would like to put something in the RIFCO newsletter for January. And Fern, I take it you're on the call, right? I heard you earlier. You still there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you think we could kind of work together on putting something in the RIFCO newsletter for
I'd
next
be
month?
happy to.
Great.
Sure thing, Mark.
Just like we'll put together a short synopsis of what the proposed changes are and what the plans are to do workshops, if any, to amend the BMP manual that RIFCO published some years ago. and get that taken care of.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay,
And
thanks.
and we've had that talk too, Mark, internally about just getting the group back together to update that.
Getting the band back together.
Yeah, I think it was 1996.
I sent you the, I think I sent you the PDF on that, didn't I, Fern? Do you still have that?
Yes, you did. I was 4 years
Yeah.
old when you wrote it.
I did not write it. It was, the credit goes to Jay Aaron and Greg Cassidy, who pulled most of that together. I just kind of finalized it in that format you saw. So I can't take credit for writing it, no matter how old you were. Matter of fact, when Jay and Greg wrote it, you probably weren't even born.
Good stuff. We'll get a multi-year approach to this, but I think that's great that RIF goes up for working with DEM on this. As
We'd love to host some. We'd love to host some workshops.
Excellent.
I'd like to just add quick from the conservation side that for those of you who you haven't heard from her from other channels, I know she reached out to the Rivers Council and the watershed agents, watershed groups. But Kate McPherson has offered her services for conservation organizations looking to make comments and looking for some expertise in sorting out what exactly is different. And that's both an enormously generous offer, and she's obviously, having come from DEM Wetlands, she knows her stuff. So if you're in organizations, either as your main gig or a side gig or whatever, and you could use her services, or to let others know that might be able to use them. DEM is expecting, pushback to try to whittle away at the gains they've made. And so it would be very helpful to have counter voices supporting, saying, either this is good or it doesn't quite go far enough, to be able to counter that.
Well, good. Well, we'll stay tuned. Keep working together on wetlands regulations as well. I think we're ready to move on to the first pass at reviewing the Woodland Partnership's strategic plan. Hope some people may have gotten an opportunity to take a look at it. But I can provide a brief overview. And Kate, you can certainly jump in here. But I think our goals, we have this strategic plan that was funded by a grant from the Rhode Island Foundation for the 2017 to 21 period. We worked with Amanda Mahaffey of the Forest Stewards Guild, putting it together. This was our first plan, and we're getting on 4 years out from that time. And of course, some things have changed since then, but haven't had the opportunity to really take a significant amount of time to review it and think about where to go from here. And I'll run through it. I think our goals might be to consider what we want to focus on over the next year and a half, what to drop out, and then what would be helpful to the partnership in terms of documentation, both for the rest of the this plan period, and then thinking ahead a bit. But just for highlights, the plan was divided into 3 different focus areas, policy and economics. We added the economics in there, with Governor Raimondo's emphasis on that. Kate, did you want to add something there? No, okay. There was also a stewardship focus section, and then education. And I think, our work and what we have done has really focused in the policy and economics and stewardship areas. And we, haven't, been as active in the education area. Certainly, working with, limited, resources, until, recently, a couple of, volunteer, coordinators and not having, someone, who's had, real dedicated, time to work on that. And then certainly, working with the strengths and interests of partnership members too. But, for what we said that we would do for policy and economics, we're interested in becoming part of the Executive Climate Change, Coordinating Council. And, we found that the Woodland Partnership, itself was not, eligible for direct participation. But we have, been participating through DEM. Forests, are included in the Resilient Rhode Climate Change Plan, and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Plan. The Woodland Partnership, did conduct the industry focus group study, with some funds that were, left over from the grant. I think there's been, limited follow-up on that, despite the best efforts of RIFCO to move that along. But we haven't been as successful as we would have liked in getting the private sector, specifically the forest, and wood products industry to participate. URI put out the Forest Economic Impact Study that those two reports certainly reference each other. And then, of course, there's the Rhode Island Forest Values report that came out in 2019 as well. Grow Smart Rhode Island has been working on forest-friendly zoning and, working with training and educating community officials. It's certainly been, sounds like it's been challenging and controversial in some places, sometimes more successful than others, but Scott and Grow Smart have really been our point partner on that. And for connecting forests to human benefits, I think the tree equity and health, project, which the Woodland Partnership has had limited, direct involvement in, but, with our partner in DEM, I think that's the biggest single effort I can think of to address that, and the development of the tree equity score and rolling out those products. We another things we said we do, we haven't hosted an event for legislators, although I believe John Campanini may have gotten a copy of the Forest Values report to them. I'm not, Kate's nodding your head there, so that happened. And then particularly with the divisions of forestry and agriculture, combined now, it may be a prime opportunity to include wood and forest products together with traditional agricultural ones in local marketing programs. That's something else there. So that was that policy and economic section. Just to move on to the stewardship focus area. There's strategic plan really called out deer issues. There is the increasing resiliency in southern New England oak forests tri-state grant project that includes a focus on deer. There's a workshop that's going to be coming up in February of 2021 to look at the herbivory assessment issues and trying to get professionals more on the same page. However, it remains it's a tough topic. It's very much an issue on the ground for forest landowners. I'm not sure that or how much hunting opportunity may have increased, and our efforts to directly include the wildlife biology community in the partnership have met with limited success. We wanted to engage land trusts and conservation nonprofits more in forest stewardship and have them implement that on the ground. I think our goal was to have 15% of land trusts or conservation organizations doing that. And I don't have metrics, but Rupert may know better than I, but I get the sense that is happening more. RIFCO is educating landowners on deer issues. And then one other key item was looking at the Forest Farm and Open Space Act in a study, or look at that program and how to make it more successful. And I know was addressed in the forest values report and some other forums, but I don't know how directly we've been able to do that, or what DEM may be working on that. Then finally, just going to the education focus area, the one where I think we've been able to meet the fewest of the goals. There is a basic Rhode Island Woodland Partnership page up on the Rhode Island Woods website, which we have ambitions to expand, but that hasn't happened yet. There are some other forestry focused websites in Rhode Island, I think associated with the Tree Equity and Health project, for example. And there were hopes for some other educational efforts, ranging from expanding the Walk in the Woods program for school age kids, to green schools, and facilitating connecting students in higher education with the forestry jobs that I don't think have really happened. Also the local wood marketing was touched on in this section as well, and that's something that they're maybe primed to do more with now. So it's a brief summary, or maybe not so brief, but open to people's comments and thoughts about working with our strategic plan and where to go from here.
I just want to jump in and say that it's impressive looking back at the strategic plan, just how much we've been able to accomplish in the last few years. And I think we should all be pretty happy with that.
I have two thoughts listening to that, Christopher, and I don't mean to put extra work on people, but I do think brief reviews at the end of every year about what's been accomplished is a good practice that maybe the Woodland Partnership might want to get into the habit of doing. It could be a half hour on an agenda of a meeting where everybody just quickly brainstorms what's been done, and then you've got that record. That's thought number one. And thought number two is being weak on the education side of things. Audubon has a very robust education department, and we do an awful lot of the things the Woodland Partnership wants to do around outdoor education and stuff. So maybe re-looking at that as a goal of the Woodland Partnership and thinking about how do we take credit for what the partner organizations are doing anyway, and call that part of what the Woodland Partnership is doing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Maybe we've got a few materials we want to be extra sure that Audubon educators, and I'm not just saying us, but there's a lot of environmental ed and outdoor ed going on in the state. There's RIA, the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association. Maybe we should ask to be on one of their agendas. I don't know. There's ways to do that, to make sure that the environmental ed is thinking about forestry issues without people sitting around on this Zoom screen doing anything else. Yeah.
No, good points. Thank you.
I was gonna say something very similar to that. Our outreach program, partly stymied by COVID, but was doing walks in the woods. Mary and Gabby, with a lot of, touching on a lot of those wildlife values. And also because they have the luxury of being able to provide those at no cost, they were also trying to target new audiences and get school groups and out of more urban areas or schools that hadn't normally been approached, or where the there are teachers that will year after year hound you and are very proactive, and then there's the opposite of that, and so they were trying to do some outreach there. The caveat is that they were spread pretty thin, and a lot of it is becoming like doing like critter kits and things like that, but definitely getting those resources out there one way or the other in creative ways.
We're even doing it in the partnership with Forestry for the birds, knowing that that's an RC&D partnership project with the Woodland Partnership involved. Like, there is an education and outreach component to that's happening. So I guess we check a box there too internally.
I mean, in almost every other category, we're taking credit for things that the partner organizations are doing. It's really the education is really the exception rather than the rule.
Well, I think that having this review is helpful, and I can work on documenting some of the things that I just went through and incorporating some of your comments here, and send it around to share with other efforts that haven't been captured that we might want to include. And I think we could consider highlighting or some things that might be too ambitious for us to take on at this time, as ones that we can't work on right now, or we'll see what we want to do with them when we come around to the next plan.
Christopher,
Mm-hmm.
are we, is the partnership ready for a rewrite of the strategic plan? Is that is that the intent here? That, I'm looking at it's coming up on 2021. And
yeah, I think out maybe a year or a year plus from now, following that time frame, we could be up for a rewrite, or developing a next plan that would be helpful to us. But we're doing it because some partners suggested that it was time that we brought some attention to this, and the December is a good time to do it now. I think it could be helpful to start thinking about what kind of format or type of plan would be most helpful to us when we approach it next time.
But would it be advantageous at this point to, or is this too early? Maybe get a small group of folks together. Not suggesting that I want to be in that group, but is now the time to get that group together and start, at the very least, reviewing it?
Well, it certainly helps to have have engaging in that and interested. We've got the active policy working group as well, but I think that could be a good thing, and with the different skills and interests that the partnership members have.
Maybe a good time to look for a funding source for that as well, if anyone wants to volunteer.
This is just one opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, but there are a lot of things on there that we've done, but there are a lot of things on there that we either, there are some things that we either haven't tackled or that we want to continue to work on and double down on. I don't look at it and think of it as that out of date. There are a couple of things that, I guess my point is, I think it makes a lot of sense to continue to reflect on what it says and what it doesn't say, but I don't at this point know that we have so limited time and resources. I don't know that I would recommend doing that process over again in the next year or two.
Yeah, I could see some kind of, pared down process being the way to go.
Maybe I agree with you, Amanda. I think that when somebody said, maybe we should start looking for funding, right now, funding is really tough unless you're dealing with COVID or it's, sort of social fallouts and stuff like that. So maybe we could, Christopher, put on a future agenda, a discussion, and then towards the goal of a consensus to continue the strategic plan for another year or something along those lines. That way we would feel like we'd done it consciously and together, but it also would not mean obliging ourselves to roll out a whole big planning process right now. So
David, what sort of time frame do you think would be helpful for you doing that, looking ahead at 2021 to do it, early in the year or later on?
I don't think it has to happen real quick. I think I don't know, in the early fall or something like that. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, a time when we have we need an agenda, we need to fill up an agenda or something like that. I just think that I don't know, it'd be nice to discuss it, but then to be able to do something like Amanda suggested, which is maybe roll it forward a year so that a continuing resolution, those are trendy these days.
Well,
But I think having some kind of, go ahead.
Maybe another approach is not to take the whole thing all at once, but like you did, Christopher, you kind of outlined 3 or 4 different sections. We take one at a time as an agenda item, and then we can spread it out during the entire year. And maybe within that one, as Amanda said, we accomplished a lot, we still got a lot more to do. Okay, we're done with that one. We don't have to talk about that one. Leave it the way it is. That might be an approach to get through it, but certainly not in one chunk.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think the process can look at what's been accomplished, whether we still agree on what needs to get done, and a quick prioritization of those things. And then I think that the plan can live on quite a lot longer than just stamp a new date on it and on you go.
So something that could be, updated, using this as a template. With
An awful lot of good work was put into that plan. And like all plans, it's got a whole lot of stuff that, is much bigger than the time frame that was set up. Yeah.
Right.
But that was 5 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. I was younger 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problems that we tried to tackle are problems that have been around for decades and decades. And so it's that, like I said, it just still feels very relevant to me. I mean, I went through and I thought like, oh, well, do we still want green schools in here? Do we have a champion? Is that going to get done? But there were very few things that I thought, okay, check it off. We already did everything we want to do, even where we've made a lot of progress. And there were very few things that I thought, well, we haven't got to yet. Maybe they should actually go. It's just they're still important, but we only have so much time and so many partners. That was just my thought.
All right. Well, I will, write up, the summary and these thoughts to, circulate around, and we'll plan on, revisiting it during the coming year. I think one focus area at a time. is a good suggestion. Then with the goal of ultimately, revising the plan, using the existing template. And understand that some of you need to drop off now at 2:30. Thanks for sticking with us until this time. For those of you who are the Woodland Partnership diehards, I think we can move on to partner updates for those who have them. So I'll just go around, and if you got an update you'd like to share. You're in the upper left part of the screen now, Paul. How about what do you have with the Burrillville Land Trust? It was Paul Roselli there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, some of you know we're still after a $2.2 million piece of property. We put a video together. We've come up with a flyer. The flyer is about to go out to donors all across the state, the region, and anywhere where there are deep pockets. The hope is within a year or two, we can acquire that 150 acres. That's it.
That's good. Thanks. Amanda.
Sort of peripheral to all other programs, and DEM covered a lot of it. The only, I'll say one thing, because I had mentioned it before with the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Last year, I had mentioned that I was supposed to be part of a symposium to talk about maladaptation to climate change, and my session was on renewable energy, sort of the unintended impacts of moving forward with that at all costs. That whole conference was canceled because it was just it was spring of 2020. It's that panel is going to, and it's not open, but it might be recorded, and I will share whatever comes out of it in terms of the discussion. But that's going to go forward this year at the NIAFA conference, which will be online, so hopefully shareable. I think I had one other thing, but I forgot what it was. Oh, when Kathy was on at the last meeting, she had mentioned that the Division of Fish and Wildlife was going to undergo like a soup to nuts assessment of their operations. And I'm not going to be able to share details about that at any point. I don't think it's supposed to be like a very, internal process, but I just wanted to say that because it wasn't signed off on yet, and we've been waiting, at least on our end. That process has actually kicked off, so that's really exciting. And I was also super excited that the, I don't know whether the facilitator or the leader, but the consulting group had actually asked us in our very first meeting if we had sea level rise maps and maps of population projections. So he's obviously a big picture thinker, which was really exciting, and talking about the relevancy of our agency, the size of our constituency versus where our funding is coming from and things like that. So there'll be some pretty big conversations that I'm really excited about. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's go on to David.
The big news, I guess, from our front is that the Conservation Stewardship Collaborative has done its grant making from its endowment this year, and Rupert, I guess, is off the call, but he was involved with that, as was TJ Boudreau. And the survey received a grant that will enable us to continue to operate the heritage database for another year. So, great. Hey, that's awesome. It's actually, we talked about, the heritage database keeps coming back every year to the CSC, for operating money, and the CSC really talked about coming to terms with the idea that this would be an ongoing expense. And so it was really great to hear that program talked about as kind of a baseline fundamental thing that was an annual expense, because that is the first time that that's really been talked about in those terms, I think, since Rick Enser left. over a decade ago. And so with this grant and some other initiatives that we have underway, I'm really hoping we are going to make big progress this year on putting that whole program back together again. I mean, we've had the database, we've kept it on life support, you know, with like a drip in the arm for the last 8 years, but not made any headway, you know, only just kept from falling backwards. And so I'm really very hopeful about that this year.
Thanks, David. That's very, very encouraging.
A lot of credit. I mean, the CSC has kept it going all this time. So, and that was, you know, an initiative by actually Janet Coit and Pete August and myself way back in the day. And a lot of the credit for kind of breaking the logjam goes to DEM. The rearranged new folks at DEM, Fish and Wildlife, have been terrific and really looking at this from a whole new perspective. It's awesome. I'm very excited about it.
That's great. We'll look forward to hearing more. Go on to Paul Dolan.
We're still dealing with the forest energy grant. We've done a workshop on the geothermal on greenhouses in the snow, and on our forestry assistance, we had the coverts. So we had 2 sessions with that. We're still subcontracting with URI on them doing their outreach, and forestry for the birds is just moving along. That's where we are.
Thanks, Paul. And Alana, what's happening with the FEMC?
I don't have much of an update. Maybe we could call it a pre-update. I just started actually probably the first of this month, but Nancy Stairs and I have been in conversation, and I think that we'll have much more of an update in the new year in terms of some stuff about plots and further participation. So I hope I have you at the edge of your seats with that riveting news.
Great. And I know one meeting a year, you know, we devote to being the FEMC state committee meeting. And it was last spring, if I recall correctly, perhaps in April. But we can, you know, identify, you know, in advance, you know, when it would be helpful to have that meeting. I guess it's, you know, it'll probably be a Zoom one. But we, you know, we can see it coming down the pike and then plan for it.
Absolutely. We'll give you guys some advance notice about that. And yeah, we're in the very, very early stages talking about populating a committee. So I hope I have more of an update maybe by our next meeting.
Sounds good. Mark, do you have any updates from RIFCO?
Not really. You know, the big thing we would have been doing this year would have been, this time of year would have been our annual conservation awards dinner along with the conservation districts and RC&D and all that. And that's on that's going to be put off till next year, obviously. So we're just kind of treading water like a lot of other people, I guess. Not much to report on.
Understood. We'll definitely be looking forward to the awards banquet and dinner when we get out and do that again. But it's a tough year for that.
Right.
Right. Scott Marshall, I see you're on the call still, and don't know if you have additional updates from DEM, but just wanted to reach out and invite you to share if you would like to.
Thanks, Chris. Actually, no further updates. I think Ken and TJ pretty much mentioned everything that we've been working on.
Got it. Thank you. And thanks for being here and staying for the whole meeting. How about you, Kate?
Nothing new or crazy. That grant, the RCPP grant, went in on behalf of DEM. Thanks to David and everybody else who helped with that. Hopefully we'll get some more money for the Natural History Survey. We had nearly $6 million in match, so it'll go in as a $12 million grant, which is sort of crazy. I guess we hear in February. I'm not certain on that. I've been pestering Bruni, so maybe we'll have some sort of idea of when we'll hear back on that soon. Collecting applications for Southern New England Heritage Forest. So if you know any landowners who want a bird plan, we're accepting applications through the end of this month. And that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything. Paul got the forestry for the birds. I think we're going to try for some online workshops in the future based on how things are currently going. And that's sort of it.
Thanks, Kate. Just a couple of my own, but speaking of online workshops, the increasing resiliency in southern New England oak forests grant has been forced to explore alternatives for outreach and engagement both with landowners and the professional forestry and land management community. I think the virtual landowner kind of town hall that they're planning, following up the series of in-person events that we did a year ago, is going to be moved into late January to try to check in with those folks, see what they're thinking about in regard to their woods. Of course, a lot of things have changed and what you can do and what you can work on, but to try to keep them motivated for stewardship. And then I believe in February, want to have these dates soon, but there'll be a virtual oak resiliency assessment workshop when we're going to be able to roll out and test the web-based tool that I believe I mentioned in a previous meeting, that foresters and landowners who really like to to get under the hood can use. Talk about the deer browse issue and methods of assessing impacts, and try to build some consensus there. But that'll be coming along in the later part of the winter. And then we're in my URI hat. I guess I'm currently working on some trainings that are going to augment or supplement the national NRCS training that's called Introduction to Conservation Forestry. This will be Introduction to Conservation Forestry in Rhode Island and southern New England, with more information about our regional forests and the kinds of landowners we have here, and what management planning and stewardship and operations look like on the ground. And I'll be learning a lot in the process, and it's the primary target audience is NRCS planners, but since it will likely be delivered online, perhaps it could be of interest or benefit to to others as well. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that, in case there are groups or venues where it might be of interest. And that's the last thing I have. So appreciate everyone who's stuck through to the end of the meeting. Like looking ahead into 2021, I believe our next meeting will be on Thursday, January 21st. Kate and I will work on developing an agenda. So I'm sure we'll have a robust policy section in addition to other topics. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to bring up or talk about now?
So Paul brought up OER earlier, and in the grant writing realm for that RCPP, I had a few conversations with Sean O'Rourke about the OER wanting to shift some of their focus or thought or like work on forest conservation for climate change resiliency in terms of aggregating forest conservation projects with water utilities. So maybe that's a future conversation to be had in this group. He was looking for some input and for some ideas about how best to aggregate forest conservation projects with water utilities. And there is that funding available. It doesn't seem to be utilized currently in the way that it's set up. So just want to flag that, put that on a future agenda.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kate. Do you think Sean might be up for, or would he be the one to come and talk with us about that?
I think so. I think he's looking for input, and knowing that we exist as the body to provide that input without having to find us all individually seems like a really good opportunity.
Indeed. Would you think January, would that be too early, or could this be something that we might pursue for a January focal topic?
I'm not sure. I can send him an email just to keep it relevant and keep it on the, we've already been talking about it, so I'll shoot him an email.
All right. Well, thanks. Certainly doesn't hurt to get ahead with that, and we would certainly welcome him here probably during the first part of 2021. All right. Well, with that, I think we've come to the end of our meeting. But thanks to all of you for your contributions to the Woodland Partnership and all the work you do for on Rhode Island's forests and stewardship and conservation. And hope you make the best of the snow out there, and have a happy holiday season and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, all you're doing. Merry Christmas.
See ya, everyone.